Today is Rob's birthday, and I just felt like I should be the one to read this one. So the original blog post at everreadanauthor.com was posted on September the 30th, 2021 at 2:42 p.m. It was only a few weeks ago that I wrote about my amazing friend Manuel's passing in a long post. I know we have the attention span of goldfish. Rob was also a no-frills person that would probably tell me not to bother writing this at all. I met Rob on social media. He lived in the UK. He was a mutual friend of a girl I met on site. I don't remember how I met her, but she and I became friends because I probably commented on some public post of hers. She's hilarious, with a witty self-deprecation streak like me. Rob came after me once about a comment I made under one of her posts. I can't remember what it was about, but I know he'd started the argument. We went back and forth until one of us DM'd the other. I think it was him. I remember I'd said something to the effect of, "Your arrogance is intriguing somehow." And we became friends. That was over 5 years ago. Rob was not my style. He partied hard. He managed a pub once, he went to jail once, he had an ex-girlfriend who stabbed him and ruptured his bowel. His friends were yobos too. On the sporadic occasions we'd talk back then, he'd tell me about his latest misadventure. Example, a friend of his having something stolen and he and his group were gonna go get the guy. This apparently meant beating up some other English lad and then calling a truce. I thought it was cool. I'm not really into bashing people, but this was somehow old-fashioned and endearing to me. I also told him to just call the cops so he wouldn't get into trouble, but you can never change Rob's mind. Not really. He'd let you give your opinion, then he'd give you his one-line explanation of why something needed to happen and why you were wrong, and then he'd just go do whatever it was. It wasn't until last year that we got as close as we ended up. He told me he'd been clean from drugs for almost 18 months, and that was huge for him. I was surprised and proud. His other addiction was harder to give up. He had a severely alcohol-damaged liver from his younger days, as he put it. He'd been told by medical professionals that he needed to give up alcohol and certain foods, otherwise things would not go well for him. He was warned to stop, and even given a time frame where that behaviour might take his life, but he'd beaten that by about 2 years already. I saw him try. He'd cut down drinking a lot more this year than I was used to hearing about. But it was usually only a few days before he'd have just one because he was visiting his parents or having a barbecue or his dad had some new beer to taste. We'd talk about shows and comedians. We'd send each other pictures of our cities and locations when we were on walks, and he'd get shut down insultingly when he tried to flirt with me. This usually resulted in him saying, well, one can dream, and then talk about ordering food in the next sentence. We texted every single day. Time difference meant I'd wake up to texts or have someone to chat to on the train to my slave gig. We had that kind of relationship, joking and playing, but sometimes confiding our problems out of the blue. We got each other through some stressful, confusing times. We once tried to create a children's story in voice messages. He'd send something like, "One day there was a ladybug on a toadstool," and I'd record one back, but it was in the forest, in a garden that belonged to a witch. He'd also record words and slang from his area and make me copy them and send it back. I did the same, and it was hilarious. I showed him strange rocks and pictures of the beach, and I'd get to see videos of his parents while he harassed them with a squeaky toy pig. The lockdowns in the UK were exceptionally tough on mental health. Rob told me that he would literally be losing his mind if it weren't for his pet rabbit, Terence. He said he didn't know what he'd do without him and would probably just want to die because his life was meh and the Rona stuff was ridiculous. Rob had pictures of his rabbit all over his socials, always told jokes about him and recounted his pet's cheeky antics, relying on him as a wingman with girls. He'd go to the shop with all the restrictions just to get Terence the blueberries he liked. Terence had full run of the place and could do whatever he wanted. Sleep on the couch, eat in front of the TV. Rob loved that rabbit. I even have a million pics of the fluffy little monster. Then 8-year-old Terence died. Rob was not in a good place for weeks after that. He didn't have an interest in anything but alcohol, sleep, and some comedy on late night TV. He'd get annoyed when I'd try to pull him up a little and understandably felt like crap. We both had a depression that made us very lonely. And he'd also send me messages telling me that if I'm sick or sad, it would upset him, so he would be positive for me too. When he started feeling okay again, he got the coof. Slightly before mid-year-ish? The dreaded UK strain of the Rona. He was the second person I knew who caught it in the UK. Rob kicked it in 5 days, despite his health issues. He was just pissed he couldn't taste anything. He said even with chilies, peppers, spices, did absolutely nothing. And it was so frustrating. It was when he'd recovered from the coof and was telling me he felt a lot better since Terence that his body decided to give him another hurdle. He got a bad pain in his guts one night. He said it felt like fire and he could barely walk. He went to the doctor after some cokes. He went to the doctor after some coaxing and a couple of nights trying to deal with it himself. Then he was home with some painkillers and told to rest. We went back to our messages and our regular conversations. Over the next 3 months, I'd get messages about how his feet and legs were swollen from fluid retention because his liver was playing up. But he didn't want to catch a bus to the hospital. Public transport didn't start at 4 a.m. when this was happening anyway. Sometimes he would get a ride and I'd get random pictures of his name bracelet in hospital and cannulas in his arm or bags of blood for transfusions. He had procedures where he'd have fluid extracted from over his stomach so he could breathe better. Then he'd come home and lay around for a few days. He'd recover and manage to take walks and even go to the shop and pick up things to cook at his mum's house for his family. He bragged about getting pork crackling just right because some of us weren't blessed with that skill. One of the times he was in hospital getting transfusions, he promised me he wouldn't die. Not before we could catch up after this Rona bullshit and have a drink meal together on my way to visit Cece. He told me that his doctor said in June 2021 that he had an 80% chance of still being alive in 3 months if he stopped drinking. When I asked how we get it to 99%, he told me he was going to quit drinking that Thursday. He told me it won't come to that. He was a survivor. I trusted him, and it became a routine of going to hospital, swearing off the alcohol while he was there because of the pain, and fighting with me and his mother because he hated going to hospital when he clearly needed to. Then he'd come home and start being a real cheeky bastard again. Back to the old him. We'd have our daily conversations until I'd wake up to another "I'm sick, threw up blood, gonna call my doctor" message. Then it was another hospital visit. He was a cheeky shit in hospital too, by the way. I'd get texts about how he was sneaking an old guy out for fresh air in his wheelchair, and he'd check himself out too and go home for some proper food before he'd have to come back when they noticed. The last time he was there, his parents apparently got a call saying that he was awake after a procedure, but it had been life-threatening at one point. Again, he and I went back to normal. He got the "cheer up, you're a doofus, but I'm glad we're friends" card that I sent him on the 20th of August 2021. He thanked me and told me that he read it about 20 times and it made him a bit emotional. He put it next to the rabbit ornament he had and confirmed that it did what I said I wanted it to and brightened his day. Everything was normal-ish, but on September the 12th, I had a text saying, "I'm really ill." And when I asked what was going on, he said he'd talk later because he was tired of answering the same questions from everyone. I told him it was a good idea and to get some rest. He came back to apologize for snapping at me. And I sent a Bitmoji thing of me giving flowers, and then I never heard from my friend again. The 17th of September 2021 was when I was told what happened. I obviously knew he'd been sick. It was still a shock that made me unable to breathe or swallow. The light from the phone seemed harsher and the writing 3D. He'd passed away 2 days after our last exchange. I was already missing my train buddy when I went to work that week, wondering what was going on, but thinking he must be needing space after the latest hospital stint. He told me how much he appreciated my friendship and that I had no idea how much. I made him less lonely and we'd had amazing laughs together. We were there for each other through some tough times in a very lonely and challenging year. He said that I knew him better than a lot of people and he felt 100% comfortable telling me anything. I wish he was still here. But to come back into my life and me into his at this time meant that I got to give him a send-off and friendship, excitement and positivity in the last year of his life here. I got to walk him home. It's a huge honor to walk somebody home.
I've just realised that you're an author and can't even say the word duck. What the fucking hell's up with that? No, it's duck. Dak is with an A. Duck spelt with a U.